So officially welcome to the call just for the recording's sake. Sunday, March the 19th. I was just talking about planets, and yeah, I did not follow the transit of the planets until I started to really get into human design. And because I'm a reflector, I'm mostly affected by actually the moon cycle. So I started to follow the moon cycle to see kind of what happens. And then so the moon is also very powerful. And there are moon apps that you can get that can tell you what's happening in particular with your birth sign and the influence of it. And so it's kind of like, it's fun because you can be in awareness, but you don't have to be directed by it, if that makes any sense, right? It was like, I think I shared whenever Mercury retrograde was happening, or I was talking about Mercury retrograde, I think, in recently in one of our calls, and how I'm in awareness of it, but I don't have it affect my life, and I don't use it as an excuse for behavior, right? And so an example would be whether it's human design or personality, typing, like the disc personality typing, or I think it's Briggs and something or other, or the color personality, right? I remember one of my clients used to say something, well, I'm a red, and that's what reds do. And I said to her, no, that's a choice. Like, that's a decision, right? And it's the same thing. I'm a Scorpio, and we can be really, really super loyal or not. We can be very pleasant or not. Scorpios are known to not be very kind. Um, More serial killers are Scorpios than any other sign. So I could use that as an excuse, right? Do something and say to the police officer, but I'm a Scorpio. But I'm a reflector. Or we could just have it as knowledge, positive information, and go, well, yeah, do I really want to buy into that? Do I really want to bring that into a belief? Because a belief is a belief, right? A belief is a belief, whether it's an empowering belief or a disempowering belief. It's still a belief. And I think part of being awareness of living what I call the illusion of life is that the judgment that an empowering belief is better than a disempowering belief. It's not. It's a belief. It influences you. There's no right or wrong and no bad or good. So this is where the right or wrong, bad or good start to come to me as I became aware of a belief is a belief, whether it's empowering or not. Right. Um, and so we can make decisions. Will we allow that belief to influence us or not? Will we allow that emotion, which for me is sharing with you, could be more difficult if I'm in the middle of having a temper tantrum. It can be more difficult for me to center myself, and right. And I've watched myself. Have you ever had that experience where you kind of are watching yourself like behave in a way that you're like, ooh, that's not cool, or like, oh, look at me losing my shit. And so it's kind of like my body is outside of, and then afterwards I'm like, so what was the trigger of that? Right. So it's sometimes it's even being an awareness of, have you left your body? Are you watching yourself, like the director, in my particular instance, lose my shit? Right. And then what decisions do you make? Because again, you don't, it's not a wrong thing. Excuse me, it's just to be in awareness of that thing, right? I remember once in one of my not so great moments in my relationship with Rob, a trigger for me is um healthcare. So I am a non-traditional healthcare person. So if I'm not feeling well, I will phone like my energy people first. I will phone my naturopaths. I'll do research on the internet about supplements, perhaps maybe that I could take. I will do everything in my power to not go to the doctor first. Now, that's not a right or wrong, but there's a shadow self to that too, right? I mean, sometimes it would just be faster if I went. Now, I have less faith and trust in the regular medical system than I do with all my other people. But it's a trigger in my life because I grew up with my family and there wasn't a lot of respect. So when I would say to my mom, I've been diagnosed with something or this, she's like, did you go to a real doctor or one of your doctors? Right. And so that's been a trigger, so because I've said, well, what's my non-real doctor, naturopathic doctor, actually goes to school longer than your doctor. Just saying, right? My chiropractor, when my mom used to not believe in chiropractors, went to school as long as your like medical doctor who sent you for x-rays and then gave you muscle relaxant and told you there's nothing they could do for your back. So I've had tons of judgment both ways. I judge my parents and people for judging me, and I was super defensive, still can be super defensive about my way. And so in one of my not great moments, Robin had said something that triggered me about my supplements. And I remember observing myself throwing my pill bottles at him and totally losing my shit. And so I share this with you because it's also part of who I am. It's like I don't have my poop in a group all the time. Now, this was about 5 years ago, 4 years ago, 5 years ago. So I'm confident that I wouldn't throw my stuff at him any longer. But in that shadow self, that's what's going on. And I observed, right? The beautiful piece of the observation afterwards was that I could observe it as if I was not the person triggered, because I started to ask the questions. What about that triggered me? What about that had me lose my shit? What about that had my shadow self show up? What about that situation? Like, what was going on within me? Because that wasn't his responsibility or his fault, right? Now, both Rob and I have in our human design, I can't remember what gate it is, but it's the gate of, I think all of us have the possibility of doing this, but there's an actual gate of manipulation, right? So I think everyone can manipulate, but both he and I share this gate. So when we're in that shadow self, right, that's who that. So that's from the trigger. The thing that he said was meant to trigger me, right? It was maybe unconsciously intentional, if that makes any sense, right? So it wasn't out of malice per se, but it was his shadow self showing up. My shadow self was to lose my shit, right? And throw things at him. And the only thing that I could think of that would relieve the frustration at that time was throwing stuff at him, because that's what was going on, right? And so part of that, though, was this awareness that I was looking for approval from my parents. So I wasn't even looking for approval from him. But at the core of it was I was looking for approval from my parents that the way that I show up is okay. And it really had nothing to do with the healthcare system, right? So the problem is never the problem. So I'll say that again, the problem is never the problem. It's what the meaning we give that problem, but chances are the problem isn't even the problem. So I'll go back to that situation. The problem wasn't that he had judgment around the supplements. And the problem isn't that, that he has more faith in the healthcare system than I do. None of that was the problem. The problem was I wanted to belong to my parents. The problem was I wanted people to see what I see, right? I wanted people to come over to my side of the line, right? And point the finger at the healthcare system. But the truth is, my mom would be dead without the healthcare system. My mom's had two open heart surgeries. She had rheumatic fever of the heart when she was a kid. And so my mom would be dead. So there's a part of me that's grateful for the healthcare system, and there's a part of me that's not grateful for the healthcare system, right? And so, but what I was really looking for was acceptance. that's what I wanted. And I was really looking for was this sense of belonging, because at my core at that time, I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. I felt like this like third wheel all the time. And I wouldn't have gotten to that place of, oh, this has nothing to do with supplements and healthcare system. This has nothing to do with him judging me being on the supplements. This has nothing to do with his his um, manipulation tactics and my response to manipulation tactics, or me behaving like, a 2-year-old. It has to do with this belonging piece. But I wouldn't have gotten there had I not taken the time to appreciate the fact that I was in that, like, left my body and observed, which you can do afterwards, right? You can kind of think about a situation maybe that you think, like, what was my trigger? Right. At that time, the question I asked is, why the hell did I behave like that? Right. And I was really embarrassed. I had tons of guilt, probably tons of shame and embarrassment around it, because I consider myself to be fairly level-headed. And that was not a very level-headed thing to be. I was not behaving level-headed, right? So I had a lot of embarrassment and shame around it. And so then the next level for me to uncover was, where did the guilt come from, and where did the embarrassment come from? And again, at the surface level, that makes sense, right? What adult woman throws pill bottles, right, at her person, right? But it was deeper than that, right? There was so much shame around, I'm not allowed to lose my temper. There was guilt around, don't lose your temper, right? And so then that was the next level to explore. Why is it not okay for me to be mad? Why can't I be angry? Why can't I be judgmental? Why can't I lose my shit? Why can't I yell? Why can't I scream? Why can't I have a temper tantrum? Right? And so that too went back to childhood. And my dad. My dad has a wicked ass temper. I've inherited my dad. Well, I could say that. There's that piece. The belief, I've inherited my dad's temper. Have I really? Or is that an excuse? Right? See how we can, it's not a rabbit hole, but see how we can just spend our time in contemplation. You hear something, which is why it's so great to talk out loud, by the way. You hear something and then you go, ooh, is that true? So we can say, I learned this from one of my coaches. Up until this very moment, I had a temper. I had a temper like my dad, right? Up until this very moment, so I can let go of it. I can create a new belief. But part of that exercise was I came to the understanding that it was okay for other people to have bad days. That was my belief. It was okay for other people to lose their shit, but I couldn't. I wasn't allowed to. And so I had to give myself permission to lose my shit and be but I also had to in the context of, I became aware that it was important, not had to in the context of anything other than that. Right? I also became aware of how important it was that I allow myself to have the bad days and then move on and let it go. But it was also important that I understood the triggers behind, if I was losing my temper, what those triggers were, because those were really, really, for me personally, my triggers are really deep core wounds, right, from childhood. And so then it was like, what else can I do? How else can I show up? Right. And so then in being in a relationship with someone, having a conversation about, okay, here's why I lost my cool, right? And then all of the other things that can come from that. So I'll give you an example of what happened after that. One day Rob was teasing me in front of somebody about throwing pill bottles at him. I was horrified. Like, because there was so much shame around it. And then I was so mad at him. Like, freaking out mad, like really, really pissed off. And I was pissed off because I was embarrassed. And but then what it reminded me of was, and he and I talked about it because he said, I don't understand why you're so angry. And I said to him, because that's a horrible thing to do, is to throw pillows. He goes, I thought it was really funny. And I'm like, I know you did, but I didn't. Sorry, this stray hair happening bother me. Sorry. And so I said to him, like, don't do that. So then we talked about like why I was embarrassed and the shame that I had around it. And which led to, in my household, you weren't allowed to tease people, right? Because he was teasing me, and he was teasing me with an audience, which is even worse in my house growing up. But what came from it was this gift of me being able to make light of the situation. But the deeper, darker part of it was to keep it secret, because my house was full of secrets. You didn't talk about bad behavior. You only presented to the world how awesome you were. You weren't allowed to talk about the shit. And you certainly didn't want to know, you didn't want your neighbors to know, or your family to know your secrets. And so for me, that was a secret because it was something I was embarrassed about. And so what Rob showed me is that there doesn't need to be any secrets. Like, it's okay that I'm not perfect. And it's okay that people know that I'm not perfect. And it's okay that people know that I have this, as he said, his wicked ass temper. And then he teases me and he said, it's a good thing you don't have very accurate aim, right? Like, he said, I'd have been dead. But I knew it was okay, because he just would like dodged it. Right? It was like the Matrix scene, right? He just like moved his body around, right? Which made me more mad, because I really wanted to nail him in the head, right? It's a good thing there was no like weapons around. So there's so many layers to situations that we find ourselves in, right? But if you're open to radical honesty, if you're open to like observing and contemplating all aspects of your life, you'll be shown so many amazing things, right? And often you don't have to know why, like, why do I do that, right? Because the why, of course, has you go back into your brain, so the why could have been, well, I did that because I don't like to be embarrassed. That's the why, right? I did that because the why is I wanted to belong. But I wouldn't have necessarily got there asking the question why. But what I wanted to do was to understand the nature of who I am at every single level, because what I wanted, now this is what's going to not make a lot of sense to, well, it will make sense to all of you. What I wanted was a different outcome in my life. And in particular, what I was working on was my business. And so what has throwing pill bottles at Rob's head have to do with how I show up in business? Everything. Everything. Because I showed up that way in defense of my position. I showed up that way because I was triggered by my not belonging. I just want you to understand, but more so, I want you to believe what I do. I was triggered by, you can't have guilt or shame or embarrassment. You can't be angry. You can't have bad days. And you have to have secrets. Well, that girl that showed up throwing pill bottles, that little girl she also shows up in my business. Right, there's no separate, right? So she shows up in my business. So she shows up in my business. What's the outcome of that? So if I need to belong, I want everyone to come over here and do it my way. I want you to see my way, right? I'm going to have lots of secrets, right? I'm going to lose I'm not going to be able to, I'm not going to be able to like have bad days in business or around people. You know, like that energy of that is so um limiting, right? So we don't have to work on like it's important. So I'm not dismissing working on marketing and sales and operations, because I mean that's how business is built. But who's running the show of the marketing and sales and operations, right? Is it the woman who was throwing the pill bottles? Is she the one, which is the inner child? Is she driving the bus, the business bus, right? Or is um this person's here today with you, who's really grounded and really centered and really connected to love? Now, that young child that was triggered who wants to belong, I mean, she's still in the bus. Like right? Like right, she's still with me. She's in the bus. She's just at the back of the bus today. When there's a trigger happens like that, then she moves up beside me. And the intention that I have is that she can be with me on the bus, not asking her to get off the bus. Because that, I mean, so just think about that. That's like, you don't belong here, so you have to leave. But it's like, you absolutely belong here. However, why don't you sit beside me and not drive the bus? Because, you know, she would drive the bus being pissed off. She'd drive it over the cliff just to make a point, right? Just to make a point, right? So it's really about how many taking the opportunity, I guess, whenever you have it. So you don't unnecessarily don't force it, but right, taking the opportunity to be in awareness of how your personality, your unconscious, your side of your beliefs, how everything is showing up for you as an opportunity. Right? That it's not one, it's well, there's no separate, I guess, right? Like it's I show up in all areas of my life. What does that look like, right? So Sherry shares with us her little girl's been known to do some version of throwing pill bottles, right? Yeah, yeah, because she feels unimportant or yeah, because she's afraid of being unimportant or feels unimportant. And so then in that particular instance, Sherry, we would go, okay, so what do I need to do? So if that was me, what do I need to do to feel important? How do I need to behave? What feelings do I need? What state of mind do I need to be in so that I can feel important, right? And so I think the pieces of it are, how many times do we dismiss our feelings or emotions? And whether we dismiss it because it's like, well, it's no big deal, I just had a bad day, which is another way of like being dismissive to ourselves, not allowing ourselves the opportunity, right? Or we have shame or guilt around it, and so we dismiss it because we're trying to suppress it or repress it. And can you just lovingly embrace yourself? Can you lovingly embrace yourself and allow yourself the opportunity to be all versions of you, right? And an acceptance of oneself, in my humble opinion, isn't an acceptance and then a dismiss. It's like, oh, that's just who I am. Because that's more dismissive, I think. It's an opinion. Then, well, that's interesting, and turning it into an observation and then asking yourselves these deep questions. Because the transformation that I believe that you're seeking is within the questions, right? It's within the questions. And when you ask those questions, then the answers will come. And that's because also I'll kind of end our time together with this. Our brain is a goal achieving machine. It's kind of like chat GPT on steroids. I used to say it's Google. I'm going to say it's chat GPT, but Google on steroids. When you ask it a question, So I just had this awareness. When you ask it a question, it comes up with a response. I'm going to go back to ChatGPT. Into the, and if you're using OpenAI or ChatGPT, it's called, but OpenAI, the data that comes, the information that comes out depends on the prompts that you put in. So I really do think our brain is more like that. What questions, what prompts are you asking will lead to what comes out. And so we'll kind of end with that. And Sherry has a last comment for us, which is great. She said, in my experience, a good start is putting the spotlight on her letting other parties, always her husband, know that that's what was asking for what she needs, and also giving it to herself, right? There's a great comment in the chat. Thanks, Sherry. Yeah, right. So your awareness will come from the prompts that you ask yourself, right? And if you're asking the same question over and over again, you're getting a different answer, right? So although I wonder if we could do in the chat box, in the chat GPT, you can say, this is great. However, can you answer this as if you were a business consultant, or answer this if you were a social media expert, or like you can put different prompts. Maybe that's we need to ask ourselves. This is great. That was a great answer. However, can you pretend that you are whatever? Pretend you're a social media expert. What would you say? I don't know. It could be fun. It could be fun to train to teach to ask the questions that we ask ChatGPT with different prompts. All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining me. Appreciate your time. Have an incredible Sunday, and enjoy whatever you're doing today. I think it's supposed to be nice here in Alberta. I just looked up behind me. There's sun. Yay. Love you.